On New Year's Day 2020, I released a video where I looked into whether we could calculate the Xi'an New Year from the then published Xi'an dates. The conclusion I came to then was no, because the dates didn't actually fit on a single unified timeline. It's 4 years later, and I went back to the question. So, can we work out when the next Xi'an New Year is? The answer is yes, and in fact we can work out any date as long as you're asking about a year after 1457 of the Common Era. I've made a calculator that'll help you work out any of these conversions, and I'm also very happy to announce that the next Xi'an New Year is today. But to explain all of this, we need to go on a bit of a journey, so join me as we explore the current state of interspecies date keeping in the universe of Star Citizen. My name's Jael, and if you enjoy videos about lore, languages, and little details, you should subscribe to my channel. This video and the guides at the bottom of my calculator page are organised a little bit like that iceberg meme. We're going to start with what you might very likely want to know and care about, and then delve deeper and deeper into the dark waters of calculating date time systems. I'm not going to cover absolutely everything in tedious detail, you can find all that on the calculator page, but this video hits what are the key arguments for assumptions I've made. You can try out my calculator via the link in the video description, and I'd like to thank Chris Harrow for kindly hosting it on the uo'axy'an website. Let's start with the easy part. When is the next New Year? This calculation was hung up for a while on a misunderstanding. You see, the law on the Xi'an calendar is that years are 1.28 times as long as human years, and start counting from year 0 every time they change their imperial dynasty. Similar to how in Japan and UK, there's a separate regnal calendar that counts up from the coronation of the new emperor or king. In Japan, this is actually used very widely in people's lives, while in the UK, the regnal calendar only really applies to certain official settings, such as on Acts of Parliament. The Xi'an calendar has long been said to have 3 eras for its 3 different dynasties. My misunderstanding was that the start of the year 30, i.e. the first year of the Third Era, was therefore the day of the coronation of the first emperor of that dynasty, and that was given as July 4th, 1457. Sherry Heiberg recently clarified on Spectrum that the coronation was a date that was denoted down as 3.0.3, and the year actually started in 1457.08. Sure enough, if you treat years in a decimal fashion, a Xi'an year starting in 1457.08, or in other words, January 30th, would be 33% complete by July 4th, and if you round that 33% down, you get the 0.3 from the Xi'an date. Projecting this system out, the next New Year in the real world would be February 14th, 2024. i.e. today, Valentine's Day, and the next New Year in the game world would be September 6th, 2954, also known as my birthday. Coincidentally, the date they chose for Banu First Contact is my wedding anniversary, so if you ever worry about your life revolving around Star Citizen, imagine how it feels to see the Star Citizen appears to revolve around your life. This fits the published Xi'an dates of the Third Imperial Age reasonably well. I need to discuss this concept of dates fitting because it's going to become important for the rest of this video. If you're describing an event, it could exist in the shared period of a Xi'an year and a human year that overlap by even a single day. That date would, in a certain sense, fit. However, if you wanted to say what human year matches that Xi'an year, you wouldn't pick the one that it overlaps by a single day, you'd pick one that overlaps with the majority. And that's kind of how I describe fitting in the rest of the video. For a human year, I describe the best fitting Xi'an year as the one that overlaps the majority of its days, and for a Xi'an year, I describe it as the human year that is the largest overlap to it. This could mean that 2 different human years have the best fit to one Xi'an year, even though only one of them represents the best fit for that Xi'an year. The worst fit of the Third Era that I have found is the disappearance of the famous Xi'an explorer Xi'an, which is said to occur in 3874 and 2577, 2 years that overlap by 29 days. Probing a little deeper, it's possible to work out why the Third Era starts at such an oddly specific point as 1457.08. Because each Xi'an year equals 1.28 human years, 25 Xi'an years equals 32 human years, and the human calendar dates for Xi'an years will cycle round every 25 Xi'an years. This cycle intersects the human calendar such that occasionally the first day of the Xi'an New Year and the human New Year are on the same day. 1 year when this happens is 3/1164 or 2947. The in-fiction year when they launched the Xi'an language and the Xi'an calendar. It's quite likely that this was taken as the 0 point or epoch from which all other Third Age years are calculated, and that's the assumption that I built into my calculator. There's a couple of other subtle law points that are borne out by some special dates. Firstly, in December, the Galactopedia page about the quantum drive, which originally was giving an invention date of 25,343 BCE, was updated to give the Xi'an equivalent of 0.5171. That's the first date that they've done which starts before the first year of the first era. And as that's not 5,171 years earlier, appears to describe a new pre-imperial age that starts around 39,163 BCE. I include this by default in my calculator, but it can be switched off if you don't want to make the same assumptions. Secondly, two dates that are more specific than a whole year have appeared. The aforementioned 3.0.3 matches July 4th, 1457, and 3.1044.08 matches July 5th, 2793. That's the date given for the end of the Cold War. It looks like these correspond to points that round down to 30% or 8% through their respective Xi'an years. I've called this the date code system, and because I only have these two examples to work with, my interpretation is a bit speculative. By default, my calculator just deals with percentage progress through Xi'an years, but I built a speculative system in as an option, and basically the more digits you add after the decimal point, the more precise the date, down to the order of minutes. If you are still listening, I'm assuming you want the really deep lore about dates, so let's get into it. I said at the top that my calculator works great for dates after 1457, and you can see that that's the Third Imperial Age. So why am I hesitant to be as confident about what happens before? Well, we have to make some assumptions about what happens before then, and a lot of the reasonable interpretations you could make from the written law don't actually add up to letting the human and Xi'an dates fit with one another. In fact, one of the best solutions is to assume that a simple mistake was made. The problem revolves around two issues: what happens at the end of an imperial age, and what happens in the years of the human calendar before one current era. Let's consider the first problem. It's said that the Third Age begins in the year Second Era 1824. There's three reasonable interpretations of that statement. A, that 1824 and 30 are the same year, and maybe it switches name at the point of the coronation around a third of the way through. B, 1824 is the year immediately before 30, so at the end of the year the Third Age begins where 1825 would have been. Or C, the Imperial Age totally resets the calendar with an early new year, so the start of 30 falls somewhere inside 1824. However, I don't think this is very likely, because as well as making the calendar unnecessarily complicated, the fact that the start of the Third Age appears to be backdated, as we've discussed, to earlier in the year doesn't really seem to fit with this idea. I'm going to keep this possibility in a box for now, and we can return to it once we've examined the whole year possibilities. The second problem is a problem of our own calendar. The Second Imperial Age includes the transition from the before Common Era period to the Common Era period, aka the BC AD transition. What happens here can differ between different commonly used calendar systems in the real world. In the Gregorian calendar, the one that we kind of use for most civil applications, there is no year zero. So the year before 1 CE is 1 BCE. But in the ISO 8601 date interchange format used by computers, there is a year 0 CE. So every year before that appears 1 year closer to 0 than the same year in the Gregorian calendar. This is the same result you get if you just naively did a sum over that point, i.e. if you take 20 AD and you want to go 40 years before that, you go 20 minus 40 to get to minus 20, and you get rid of the negative sign, and that's 20 BCE in the ISO 8601 calendar system. To convert it to the Gregorian year, we add 1 year further away from 0 to get 21 BCE. But what we don't know is if the BCE dates in Galactopedia have this correction applied or not. And of particular interest is what happens with the first two dates given that lie before 1 CE. So let's consider the four combinations of these approaches. We want to look at the two different ways that the whole year Imperial Age transition could go, and whether the BCE dates we've been provided are in the Gregorian or ISO 8601 format. I'll represent 2 years that have their best fit years as a green circle, 2 years that don't fit at all as a red circle, and 2 years that have something less than a best fit as an orange circle with the number of overlapping days on it. If we don't apply the correction and assume that the standard Earth year calendar does have a year 0, then 2-1824 can't be the same year as 30. None of the dates except for the BCE dates fit. Technically fits if you decide that 30 comes after 1824, but only by 1 day, the absolute most tenuous fit imaginable. So the fact that the ISO 8601 calendar doesn't fit might make you think that applying the Gregorian calendar correction is necessary, but in fact it makes it far worse with no solution that fits all of the dates. However, if you apply the correction in the wrong direction, subtracting a year and in effect inserting an additional year 0, suddenly we get a perfect match with everything matching their best year. So what's going on? Well, here's what I think happened. They took 1457.08 as the endpoint of 1824. They did a simple subtraction to work out the years prior to that. And when it came to the BCE years, aware of the Gregorian calendar issue, they added 1 to correct it. And we're rounding to the nearest year. As you can see, this gives the same dates as CIG got. However, do you spot the mistake? When I described earlier how to perform this correction, addition came after we'd removed the negative sign. Doing the addition of 1 year before removing the sign actually moves it a year in the wrong direction, and rather than removing the unwanted year 0, we've added an additional year 0. That's the most parsimonious explanation for the timeline we have if we keep those whole year transitions at the ends of imperial ages. If you're concerned about this discrepancy, there's 4 solutions I can propose. Solution 1. Go outside, breathe fresh air, touch grass, be with your loved ones. This is a minor discrepancy in some fictional dates that only reveals itself if you're really looking for it. The exact value of these dates have no meaning beyond their artistic signifier as a long time and a really long time, so the difference has no impact. Solution 2. Let's just roll with it and say that the standard Earth year calendar does have 2 year 0s. Heck, the ISO 8601 calendar introduced a year 0 because it was convenient and built for a field that didn't really care about BCE dates. The easiest law fix is just to say that the same thing happened again. It was a quirk of the astronavigation computers that enabled standard Earth time clock to function in the first place, and it's become the de facto human standard. This is the default solution I've gone for with my calendar, so there's both a 0 CE and a 0 BCE. Solution 3 is just to add 2 to every BCE date to get the Gregorian date. So the 878 BCE start of the Second Age becomes 880 BCE. There's 11 dates this applies to, and they're featured a few times on different pages, so a bit of a find and replace would be possible. Or solution 4 is we go back to the idea of having partial year transitions at the end of an imperial era. There's a set of solutions here if we assume that the BCE dates provided are in the ISO 8601 format. The absolute best fit comes if we think that 30 started 2/3 of the way through to 1824, with just over 150 days overlap for the most awkward dates. But it works so long as the changeover happens in the second half of the year to 1824. But we also have to assume that they would have done the same thing for the first and second year overlap, so there's actually a range of options which will fit all the published dates. If you want to play with these possibilities, I've added it in the advanced settings available on my calculator. So that's everything I think can best be explained by the video. If you still have any residual curiosity, please do check out the guides under my calendar page. I hope you've enjoyed it and get some amusement out of it. I've been Jail, and if you've enjoyed this video, please do subscribe to the channel and check out the videos on my end card, and I will see you around the verse.